I came home to wedding music, white tents, and strangers celebrating on my lawn. Then I saw the HOA president giving orders like she owned my land. The first sign something was wrong was the sound. Not traffic, not construction, not even the usual hum of leaf blowers that plague our neighborhood every Saturday morning. It was music, loud, rhythmic, unmistakably celebratory. I slowed my car as I turned onto my street, instinctively checking my mirrors as if I had taken a wrong turn. But the street sign confirmed it. This was home, or at least it was supposed to be. As I drove closer, the scene became clearer and more surreal by the second. White folding chairs lined what had once been my front lawn. Long banquet tables draped in ivory cloth stretched across the grass I had personally reseeded the previous spring. Floral arches stood where my oak tree cast its afternoon shade. And at the center of it all, a massive tent rose like a temporary palace, complete with chandeliers dangling inside. Cars crowded both sides of the road, and valet attendants in black vests waved guests toward parking spots as if this were a rented venue. I pulled over slowly, my heart pounding with a mix of disbelief and rising anger. For a moment, I wondered if I was witnessing some kind of elaborate prank. But the guests were real, the decorations were real, and the banner stretched across my fence, reading "Congratulations, Aisha and Daniel," was very real. I stepped out of my car, my polished shoes sinking slightly into the grass that had been trampled into submission. The smell of catered food hung thick in the air, mixed with perfume and fresh flowers. People laughed, clinked glasses, and posed for photos, completely unaware or unconcerned that they were standing on private property. My private property. As I walked closer, a woman in a headset approached me with a clipboard, blocking my path with a practiced smile. She looked me up and down quickly, assessing whether I belonged. "Sir, guests need to enter from the side gate," she said briskly. "The ceremony will begin shortly, so please don't wander near the stage." "I live here," I replied calmly. She laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "Yes, of course. Everyone says that. Please follow the signs." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flash my badge. Not yet. Instead, I scanned the crowd until I saw her. Karen, the HOA president. She stood near the tent entrance in a pale blue outfit that screamed authority in her own mind, barking instructions into a phone while pointing aggressively at my rose bushes. Two men hurried to obey her, shifting furniture without question. I walked toward her, each step deliberate. Memories flooded back. Every petty fine, every warning letter, every passive-aggressive email she had sent over the years. Grass too long, fence color one shade off, trash bins left out 20 minutes past the allowed time. She had relished every ounce of power the HOA gave her, and today she had taken it to a level I could never have imagined. "Karen," I said, loud enough to cut through the music. She turned, annoyance already etched across her face. "Sir, this area is restricted. If you're not part of the wedding—" She stopped mid-sentence as recognition hit her. Her lips tightened. "Oh, it's you." "Yes," I said. "It's me. Why is there a wedding in my yard?" She sighed theatrically, as if I were the inconvenience. "We discussed this. The HOA approved temporary use of common space for private events. This lawn falls under that jurisdiction. This is not common space." I replied evenly. "This is my property. You've cited me enough times to know exactly where the boundary lines are." Karen waved a dismissive hand. "The survey is outdated. And besides, it's just for today. My daughter's wedding is a once-in-a-lifetime event. You wouldn't want to ruin that, would you?" Around us, guests began to notice the tension. Whispers spread like ripples in water. A few people slowed their steps, curiosity replacing celebration. Karen noticed too, and her voice softened into something syrupy and manipulative. "Look," she said quietly, stepping closer. "Everything is already set up. The guests are here. The officiant is on his way. We'll be done by evening. You can be a good neighbor for once." A good neighbor. The phrase hit a nerve. For years, I had tolerated her overreach in the name of peace. I had followed the rules, attended meetings, and documented everything. And now she stood in my yard, asking me to sacrifice my rights for her convenience. Who gave you permission to enter my property? I asked. The HOA, she said confidently. I didn't, I replied. She rolled her eyes. You're always so dramatic. If you have a complaint, you can file it after ceremony. That was the moment something shifted inside me. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder. More controlled. I pulled my phone from my pocket, scrolling calmly as Karen crossed her arms. Are you calling a lawyer? She sneered. Because I assure you, the HOA bylaws. I'm calling my chief of staff, I said. She laughed again. For what? This is a civil matter. Yes, I agreed, and also a trespassing issue. Karen's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second before she recovered. Don't be ridiculous. This is a family event. So was my father's retirement party. I said quietly, and you shut it down over noise complaints that didn't exist. Her eyes narrowed. That was different. No, I said, it wasn't. I stepped away from her and walked toward the center of the lawn, pulling up photos on my phone, boundary markers, deeds, survey reports, every document I had ever saved in preparation for a day exactly like this. I had learned early in my career that authority meant nothing without proof. Guests stared openly now. A man in a tailored suit whispered urgently to a woman clutching a bouquet. The music faltered, then stopped entirely. The sudden silence was heavy, broken only by the rustle of fabric and the distant hum of traffic. Karen followed me, her voice sharp. You're causing a scene. You did that when you stepped onto my land. I replied. She leaned in close, lowering her voice. You think your job scares me? I run this neighborhood. I've dealt with police before. I finally looked her directly in the eyes. Then you should know better. She scoffed. You wouldn't dare. I raised my voice just enough for those nearby to hear. Everyone here is currently trespassing on private property without the owner's consent. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A woman near the front dropped her program. Karen's face flushed red. This is harassment, she snapped. I'll have you fined. For what? I asked, hosting an illegal event on my own lawn. She opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time since I had known her, she seemed unsure. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Years in law enforcement had taught me patience, taught me timing. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to threaten. The truth was enough. I'm asking you once, I said calmly. And this now. Karen glanced around desperately, at the guests, at the decorations, at her daughter, who stood frozen near the stage, veil trembling in the breeze. Pride wore with panic on Karen's face. You're not serious, she said softly. I met her gaze. I am. The silence stretched unbearably long. Somewhere, a camera shutter clicked. Karen swallowed hard, then straightened her back. You'll regret this, she said. I already regretted letting you think you could do this. I replied. That was when I reached into my jacket pocket, not for my badge, but for my phone again. I dialed a familiar number, keeping my eyes on Karen as it rang. Yes, I said when the call connected. I need units dispatched to my address. Unauthorized event. Trespassing. Karen's eyes widened. What are you doing? She hissed. Doing my job, I said, and for the first time since I arrived home, I felt completely in control. The call ended, and with it whatever illusion of control Karen still clung to. She stood frozen for a moment, eyes locked on my phone as if it had just betrayed her. Around us, the guests shifted uncomfortably, murmurs growing louder now that the tension had a clear source. Weddings thrive on certainty, on the promise that everything will go as planned. Uncertainty spreads like smoke, and I could feel it curling through the crowd. You cannot be serious, Karen said finally, her voice shaking despite her effort to keep it sharp. Calling the police to your own house over a misunderstanding is absurd. This stopped being a misunderstanding the moment you ignored my refusal. I replied. She stepped closer, lowering her voice again. Think about my daughter. She's been planning this for a year. Do you really want to be responsible for ruining her wedding? I looked past Karen, toward the young woman in white. The bride stood near the stage, hands clenched in her bouquet. eyes darting between her mother and me. Her smile was gone, replaced by confusion and embarrassment. I felt a twinge of sympathy, but it didn't override the facts. Responsibility rested squarely where it belonged. You should have thought about her before you trespassed, I said. Karen recoiled as if struck. Trespassed? How dare you accuse me of? The distant sound of sirens cut her off. Not loud yet, but unmistakable. A low, rising wail that made several heads turn at once. The reaction was immediate. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Phones appeared in hands. Someone near the tent whispered, "Is that for us?" Karen's confidence cracked. "You told them to come here," she said, incredulous. "Yes." "This is insane." "No," I said. "This is procedure." She shook her head, pacing now, heels digging into my lawn. "I will have your badge for this. I know people. I know the board. You think being a chief makes you untouchable." I watched her spiral with the detached calm that had served me in interrogation rooms and crisis scenes for decades. Power, when challenged, often revealed its weakest seams. "I don't think I'm untouchable," I said. "I think you're accountable." The sirens grew louder, closer. A few guests began drifting toward the exits, suddenly remembering prior engagements. Others stayed, drawn by spectacle. The caterers hovered nervously near their equipment, unsure whether to continue serving food or start packing. Karen snapped at a young man adjusting microphones. "Why did the music stop? Turn it back on." He hesitated. "Ma'am, I don't think." I said, "Turn it on." He looked at me, searching for direction. I shook my head once. He unplugged the system instead. Karen let out a frustrated cry. "This is unbelievable." Moments later, the first patrol car pulled up to the curb, lights flashing silently. Then another, and another. The controlled presence of uniformed officers stepping out of vehicles had a sobering effect on everyone present. Conversations died instantly. Even the children fell quiet. An officer approached me, professional and alert. "Chief," he said, nodding. Karen's head snapped toward him. Her mouth opened, then closed again. Color drained from her face. "Status?" the officer asked. "Unauthorized private event on private property." I replied. Owner did not give consent. HOA president organized it regardless. The officer nodded, already understanding the gravity. He turned to Karen. "Ma'am, we'll need to speak with you." Karen laughed, high and brittle. "This is ridiculous. He's abusing his position." "Ma'am," the officer said evenly, "please lower your voice." She spun back toward me. Tell him this is an HOA matter." "It stopped being an HOA matter when you crossed my fence line," I said. More officers arrived, forming a visible perimeter. Guests began backing away instinctively, clutching purses and jackets. Someone whispered, "We should leave." Someone else whispered, "Is this real?" The bride finally stepped forward. "Mom," she said softly, "what's happening?" Karen turned to her daughter, panic flashing across her face before she masked it with forced reassurance. "Nothing, sweetheart. Just a minor issue. Go sit down." The bride looked at me, then at the officers. "Why are the police here?" "Because your mother organized an event on property she doesn't own," I said gently, "and refused to leave when asked." Karen rounded on me. "Do not talk to my daughter." The officer cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we need to see any documentation you have authorized in this event." Karen fumbled in her purse, pulling out a folder thick with papers. She thrust it toward the officer. "HOA approval. Permits. Everything is in order." He flipped through the pages carefully. I watched his expression remain neutral as he reached the survey maps. He paused there, glancing up at me. "This map," he said, tapping the page, "doesn't match county records." "It's what we use," Karen insisted. "It's outdated," I said, "by several years." The officer nodded. "Ma'am, do you have any documentation from the property owner?" Karen hesitated. "The HOA represents the owners." "In common areas," the officer corrected. "This is not one." Karen's breathing became shallow. "You can't just shut this down. There are contracts. Vendors. Guests. That's not our concern, the officer said. Trespassing is. The word landed heavily. Karen's shoulders sagged slightly, then stiffened as anger surged back. This is a vendetta, she snapped. He's punishing me because I enforce the rules. I couldn't help a small, humorless smile. You enforce what benefits you. The officer turned back to me. Chief, how would you like to proceed? I considered the question carefully. Every eye was on me now. This wasn't just about Karen anymore. It was about precedent, about showing that authority didn't bend for convenience or ego. I want the property cleared, I said. No arrests unless necessary. Give them time to pack up. Karen stared at me. You're heartless. I'm fair, I replied. The officer nodded and turned to address the crowd. Attention, everyone. This event is taking place on private property, without authorization. You are being asked to vacate the premises immediately. A wave of stunned silence passed through the guests, followed by a swell of noise. Protests, questions, frantic phone calls. The fragile illusion of celebration shattered completely. The bride began to cry. That was the moment Karen truly lost control. She rushed toward her daughter, wrapping her arms around her. I'm so sorry, she whispered loudly, though her glare never left me. This man is doing this to us. I stood my ground, hands clasped behind my back. I had stood in worse storms than this. Emotional manipulation didn't move me anymore. Guests scrambled now, chairs scraping, heels sinking into grass. Vendors argued with officers. Florists complained about ruined arrangements. The caterer demanded payment assurances. Chaos bloomed where order had been forced. Karen approached me again, voice low and venomous. I will sue you. You're welcome to try, I said. You think the department will back you? I know they will, I replied. She leaned in, eyes wild. You've humiliated me. You humiliated yourself when you assumed power meant ownership, I said quietly. She stepped back as if struck again, this time by truth rather than insult. For a fleeting second, I saw fear replace arrogance. The officers continued clearing the yard, professional and efficient. Within minutes, the tent began to empty. Decorations were dismantled hastily. The banner was taken down, folded carelessly, its promise undone. The bride was escorted to a waiting car by a sobbing friend. Karen watched, helpless, her authority stripped bare in front of everyone who once feared her. As the last guest left and the noise faded, the yard looked ravaged. Flattened grass, broken stems, discarded petals. It would take weeks to restore, but the quiet that settled afterward was profound. Karen stood alone near the curb, clutching her folder like a lifeline. She looked smaller now, not powerless, but exposed. This isn't over, she said. I nodded once. No, I agreed. It isn't. And as the patrol cars pulled away and my property slowly returned to stillness, I knew the real reckoning was yet to come. The street returned to its usual stillness far more quickly than I expected. Within an hour, the last patrol car rolled away. The vendors had loaded their trucks, and the guests were gone, leaving behind nothing but tire marks and crushed petals pressed into my lawn. Evening light stretched long shadows across the damage, and the silence felt heavier than the chaos that had preceded it. Silence has a way of forcing reflection, and I stood there for a long moment, hands on my hips, taking in the aftermath. My phone buzzed almost immediately. Messages stacked one after another. City officials, legal counsel, a few curious reporters who had already caught wind of what happened. News travels fast in a neighborhood where power had been abused openly and publicly. I ignored the phone for a moment longer, choosing instead to walk the perimeter of my yard. Broken fence ties hung loose. My rose bushes were bent. Some snapped entirely. I knelt, touching the soil, grounding myself in something real and tangible. Karen was still there, standing across the street now, speaking angrily into her phone. Whatever fire fueled her earlier confidence had burned down to embers, replaced by frantic damage control. She glanced at me once, eyes hard, then turned away as if refusing to acknowledge my presence might erase what had happened. I knew that look. It was a look of someone already rewriting the story in their head, casting themselves as a victim. I straightened and finally checked my phone. A message from the city manager stood out. "We'll need a formal report tonight." I replied with a simple acknowledgement. Documentation mattered. It always did. Truth survived best when it was written down clearly and immediately. As I headed inside, exhaustion settled into my bones. Not physical fatigue, but the mental weight that came with confrontation. I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window at the ruined yard. This house had always been my refuge, a place where the uniform came off and the world quieted. Today, even that boundary had been violated. A knock came at the door just as I began drafting my report. Firm, controlled. I knew who it was before I opened it. Karen stood there, no longer in pale blue authority, but in a cardigan thrown hastily over her dress. Her makeup had smudged. Her eyes were red. "We need to talk," she said. I considered refusing, but avoidance wouldn't end this. I stepped aside, letting her in. She walked stiffly, scanning the room as if searching for witnesses. "This didn't have to happen," she said, arms folded tightly. "It did," I replied, "because you forced it." She shook her head. "You could have waited. You could have let it finish." "And then what?" I asked. "Let the precedent stand that you can take whatever you want if you decorate it nicely." Her jaw tightened. I was protecting my family. "No," I said. "You were protecting your control." She laughed bitterly. "You think you're better than me because of your badge." "I think rules apply to both of us," I said. She paced the length of the room. "Do you know how this looks? To the board? To the neighborhood? You embarrass the HOA. You embarrass yourself by overstepping." I replied calmly. Karen stopped pacing and faced me directly. "If you file that report, this becomes official." "It already is." She swallowed. "There will be consequences." "I'm aware," I said. For a long moment, she said nothing. The anger drained from her face, replaced by something closer to resignation. "My daughter won't forgive me for this," she said quietly. "That's between you and her," I replied. "But you put her in that position." Karen looked down at her hands. "I thought the HOA gave me authority. It gave you responsibility." I corrected. "You confuse the two." She nodded slowly, as if the distinction were settling in for the first time. "If I step down," she said, "will that matter?" I studied her carefully. "That's a decision for the board. And the neighborhood." She sighed, shoulders slumping. "I never thought you'd push back." "I always have," I said. "You just didn't listen." Karen turned toward the door. "This isn't over," she said again, but this time the words lacked conviction. "No," I agreed, "but it's different now." After she left, I finished the report with meticulous detail. Times, names, decisions. I attached photos of the yard, copies of surveys, transcripts of HOA notices. By the time I hit send, night had fully settled in. I slept poorly, mind replaying the day in fragments of sound and silence. The following week unfolded exactly as I expected. An emergency HOA meeting was called. Attendance was higher than it had ever been. Neighbors who had never spoken at meetings before stood up and shared stories of fines, threats, and intimidation. Karen sat rigidly at the front, face expressionless, absorbing the collective reckoning. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it brief. "This was never personal," I said. "It was about boundaries. Legal ones, ethical ones." The board voted unanimously to remove Karen as president pending further review. Gasps filled the room. Karen closed her eyes. Just for a moment. Outside, neighbors approached me quietly. Some thanked me. Others apologized for staying silent before. Change rarely came without discomfort, but it came all the same. Restoring my yard took weeks. New soil, fresh seed, careful pruning. As I worked, I found something therapeutic in the labor. Each repaired patch felt like reclaiming more than land. It felt like reclaiming balance. One afternoon, the bride returned alone. She stood at the edge of the grass, hands clasped nervously. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't know." "I know," I replied. "None of this was your fault." She nodded, eyes glistening. We got married at the courthouse yesterday. I smiled gently. That's what matters. As she left, I realized something fundamental had shifted, not just in the neighborhood, but in me. Authority wasn't about dominance. It was about restraint, about knowing when to act and when to stand firm. The yard grew green again. The fence was mended, and the music that eventually returned was my own, soft and chosen, drifting from an open window on a quiet evening. The ceremony Karen tried to steal had ended, but something more lasting had taken its place. Peace reclaimed is always louder than power misused.